consider all the worlds thy hands have made. I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my...
On the Christian calendar, today is the day known as Holy Saturday, the day between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, the day between the cross and the empty tomb, a day in the middle. And so we come today in the middle as well, in the middle of acknowledging our grieving and loss, and of remembering and honoring and celebrating the life of Garry Cundiff. Will you pray with me? Compassionate, life-giving one, before Garry was ours, Garry is yours. And we come knowing he is where he has always been, where we all are, in the arms of love. May we both grieve and celebrate in that assurance, and in the recognition that in our grieving and in our celebrating, we belong to each other. Amen. Hear these words from the book of Ecclesiastes. There is nothing better for us humans than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in what we do. This also, I see, is from the hand of God. Again, I know there is nothing better for us than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we live. Moreover, it is God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in all their undertakings. Garry Benjamin Cundiff was born to Ben and Thora in Stillwater on June the 24th, 1942. 10 years later, siblings began to arrive: Vivian, Stephen, and Joan. Garry grew up on the family farm northwest of Perkins, which included milking cows, gathering eggs, plowing wheat fields, and helping plant large gardens. He attended 12 years of school in Perkins, graduating in 1960. A big part of high school for him was participating in the FFA, where he was a member of several judging teams, and winning the national meat judging contest in his senior year. He was a loyal fan of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, and would often insist his younger siblings listen to the games with him on the radio. Garry received his Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering at OSU and served in the National Guard. In 1965, he was offered a job at McDonnell Douglas Corporation, an American aerospace manufacturing and defense contractor in St. Louis, where he would design components for fighter jets. Garry's love of baseball and the Cardinals cinched his decision to select St. Louis as his new home. He married Carol Galimberti on October 2nd, 1971. Garry went on to get his master's degree at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. He retired in his early 50s, and he and Carol pursued then a lifetime of travel and adventure. They purchased an RV, they went to all 50 states and many national parks, and traveled as well to other countries. Although Garry enjoyed the big city life, he was usually drawn to the back roads, and you would often find him and Carol on the road less taken. He would frequently buy a book on their trips, and so he had an extensive library of books about the locations they had visited. Garry was an avid reader and particularly was drawn to historical books. Another hobby he enjoyed was genealogy. He and his sister Vivian would delve into the past of their ancestors in great detail. Garry and Carol would spend countless hours in courthouses, libraries, and cemeteries. He enjoyed fitting all the pieces together and kept a record of all their findings. Garry lived an active lifestyle. He coached Stephen's Little League baseball team and taught all his younger siblings how to throw a baseball and catch a football. He enjoyed most sports and joined rugby, softball, and touch football teams when he moved to St. Louis. He also played golf, volleyball, racquetball, and tennis. Every sport he participated in was met with a competitive spirit, and he made every effort to come out on the winning side. He and Carol enjoyed bicycling and hiking with friends. It was not unusual for Garry to walk 10 miles several times a week. One of his physical highlights was hiking the 14,259-foot Longs Peak in Rocky Mountain National Park with two of his buddies. Garry was a keeper of family stories. He enjoyed people and stayed close to his Oklahoma family, his siblings, his nieces and nephews, and his many cousins on both the Cundiff and Bridenstine side. He was also attached to his St. Louis family. Carol was one of 5 sisters, and he enjoyed being a part of their lives and their extended families. He was a teaser, and people were drawn to his humor. Garry was fun-loving and the life of the party. Garry transitioned from this life on March 25th in St. Louis, and he will be sorely missed by family and friends. Garry is preceded in death by his parents, Ben and Thora Cundiff, and his sister and brother-in-law, Vivian and Jerry Pinkerton. He is survived by his beloved wife, Carol, of Lake St. Louis, Missouri, his brother, Stephen, and his wife, Mary, and his sister, Joan Hubbard, and her husband, Dan, Olive Perkins. He is also survived by his nieces and nephews, Jeremy Pinkerton, Benjamin Pinkerton and his wife, Stephanie, Stephen Pinkerton, Joanna Schindler and her husband, Garry, Jordan Hubbard and his wife, Samantha, Skylar Cundiff, Stephanie Martin and her husband, Matt, Sabrina Devaney and her husband, Mark, and Shelby Bain and her husband, Tyler. He is also survived by 14 great nieces and nephews. We give thanks for the well-lived life of Garry Cundiff.
Bear with me. Garry and Carol are coming. Sorry. A very simple phrase that meant good times ahead. When you heard that phrase, it meant something different depending on your age, depending on their age, and what your schedule was. How you were going to fit yourself into the short time period that they were going to be home. The first thing I wanted to know was when they were leaving. Not because I wanted them to leave, but because I had to get my schedule figured out to make sure no trip to Oklahoma was going to be missed. When we were young, it was cemeteries, long walks in the pasture, hayrack rides, games, wrestling, fixing things around the farm with Grandpa, genealogy lessons, or just being on the floor with whatever toy was there. It didn't matter. He could make it fun. Cindy, Carol's sister, mentioned in pictures they saw of Oklahoma, Garry was always on the floor with the kids. I actually sent one to Carol this week to show she was on the floor with the kids sometimes too. I've heard that said about our grandpa as well, and I know now with our new crop of second cousins, that is where the action is. It's how you're able to look a child in the eye on their level, touch and play with their toys, and be in their environment to make those connections. As my kids are getting older, I know that Garry was taking advantage of a small window with us. At that point, his much younger siblings had married and turned into adults right in front of his eyes, so he knew that we would be passing through this fun and carefree time of childhood at a quicker pace than our parents did. He seized the moment with us, he gravitated to us, he included us, and he was interested in us. I later went on to articulate simply why we looked forward to Garry and Carol coming, what it was about them that made their visits so special, and simply put, they were interesting and they were interested. Hearing about their travels, the Cardinals, designing fighter jets, talking about OSU sports, current, and all the way back to the 50s, hearing about what the farm was like, what Perkins was like, and what our grandparents and parents were like, and from Aunt Carol about St. Louis and the history of her Italian neighborhood, The Hill. It was all fascinating. My favorite story to have them tell was the time that they found themselves locked inside a cemetery when they hadn't noticed the closing time and the process of how they got themselves out. Our adventures with Garry and Carol were great, but their adventures together across the globe is what inspires me and should all of us to get out and live. Looking at just a fraction of the places they have been by going through their souvenirs and pictures in their house is another reminder for all of us to get out and do things. Feel it, taste it, hear it, see it, climb it. If you're into climbing, study it, and then repeat. Interesting people aren't always interested in others. I think we all know folks like that, but not the case with Garry and Carol. They were also interested in us. As we got older, they knew about their sports, our dances, our clubs, our grades, and sometimes if we had been in trouble, they knew that as well. One outing I'm sure was interesting was the time they went with my parents to sit in the parking lot, and Terry's here today, watch me carry out groceries to people's cars at the grocery store I worked at in high school. Who does that? Who is interested enough to take the time out of their day? It's so weird. The answer is the Cundiffs. If they had not kept up through phone calls and letters to our parents and grandparents, it would have been a blank slate when they arrived, but they were always ahead of the game and knowing about our lives. You don't put that kind of effort into your nieces and nephews unless you love and care about them deeply. Uncle Garry asking my wife, Samantha, about her job during their visits, both of them being engineers, really cemented how both interesting and interested he was. With Garry and Carol, it never felt like there had been a distance in time or miles when they came home. When they came home, we never missed a beat. It was as comfortable as if we saw them every weekend. The relationship between Uncle Garry and his parents was so special to witness. I always love having insight into what an adult-child relationship looked like, but it's even better now after hearing a few stories last week of him teasing his parents as a child. To have the nerve to tease your Depression-era parents by putting a rubber band on the sink sprayer to soak your mom, or throwing a mouse at your dad, who was also strong enough to live a tractor, and then laugh while weathering the storm afterwards, but then be so revered by them as an adult. They were so proud of him and what he had accomplished in St. Louis, and it showed when he was with them and when they talked about him. And they adored Aunt Carol as well. The teasing and laughing later became a part of us, and we longed to get his attention, just like Vivian and Stephen and Joan had done 30 years before. The first thing I said when I walked into his hospital room last week, representing my sister and our cousins, was, "I'm here to make sure you are being teased properly." Later, I lamented that I had not mentioned I had seen the one-armed man in the waiting room. The one-armed man, of course, was allegedly an imaginary vagabond who sometimes lived at the old cellar on the corner of our property and used to hide in the trees during our walks, according to Garry. When we were little, we assumed everyone had special family members, and you're simply caught up in the moment of comfort and joy you're experiencing. When we lost Grandpa, my senior year of high school, Stephen J. later said he thought everybody had special grandparents like we did. And as you get older, you realize that's just not the case. Luckily, we were able to mature and realize how special Garry and Carol are in real time and seize our moments with them to make the most out of the time that they were able to spend with us. Thank you, Aunt Carol, for making all those long trips to see us and sharing him with us and being a part of our family. You didn't know it at the time, but you were changing our lives, and you were giving us memories and examples that would change who we were for the better. Last week, the two of you gave me one more example, and I couldn't say it at the time, but how you loved each other at the end of Uncle Gary's adventure will change my perspective on marriage forever. We can never thank you, the both of you, enough for the feeling we got when we heard the phrase, "Garry and Carol are coming." Thank you.
I'm Cousin Dave, one of the Barry kids. Jo knew how much her brother Garry enjoyed his cousins. She asked us to volunteer our special memories and let us off with this. Cousins were a big part of Gary's life, and he thoroughly enjoyed spending time with both the Bridenstines and the Cundiffs. One family shared both genes and warped senses of humor. Ben and Chet Cundiff were brothers who had married Thora and Lavone, who were first cousins. Garry was an only child by the time Chet and Lavone had 7. My mother used to tell about when Pete and Susie and Garry would play together. Garry was docile, and when the kids would take away a toy or push him, he would just look at them. In frustration, my mother would say, "Garry, if you don't start taking up for yourself, I'm going to paddle you." It was at this point in the story one of us would ask, "Garry, was Pete really that rough?" His reply was consistent. "No, Pete was okay. It was Susie I had to watch out for." Kenny Cundiff remembers the special bond he had with Garry this way. Garry and I were roommates at OSU for one semester in a small apartment off campus. I was amazed at how we could stay up until 2 in the morning and have a test at 7:30 a.m. Garry had poured through the book and was a master at his retention of the material. With no sleep, he would show up and make a 97. He was smart, and I was amazed at his ability to keep up with his studies and still make time for fun. Neither one of us wanted to do the household chores, but sometimes it became necessary. Everything became a competition. Whoever lost a game of pool had to take out the trash. Whoever lost a coin toss had to wash the dishes. We were both competitive and the games were intense. Garry was able to make all of it fun, and we spent that whole semester laughing. I'll always remember Garry and the good times we had. Connie Bridenstine Johnson remembers Garry as a wonderful cousin, the only one that called me Constance. Connie sends her love and prayers to everyone from Idaho. Christy Miller wrote from Arizona to say that Dennis speaks fondly of the fun he had with Garry and his cousins. Garry brought fun and love to the family. And David Bridenstine wrote a pretty good little story from Ohio, but he had lots of memories of Garry. He said, "I didn't get to know Garry well, with him being, as I thought, much older than me. The earliest recollection occurred on a vacation from Ohio to Oklahoma. In those days, Dad tried to take a vacation to Oklahoma every other year. My guess is that it was in 1955 and I had turned 6. We were visiting at the old house. Garry had 2 pairs of boxing gloves that he enjoyed and wanted to show me. He and I, your dad and mine, were upstairs inspecting the gloves, seeing how good they were, how they fit, how they laced. Garry enthusiastically urged me to put them on and box him. It'll be fun. We got so far as to have them on and me laced up. I had no interest in hitting him or getting hit. All I could muster was a nervous laugh. Hostilities were avoided somehow. No blows were struck. I'm sure he had no intention of hurting me or anyone else, but the teasing was totally new to me and has stuck in my mind now for the last 70 years. The other memory involves perhaps one of the most embarrassing events of my youth. The whole family has, no doubt, heard this one. Again, we were on vacation, 1966, junior year this time. Teenage boys least want to spend with their parents. All my cousins were working, unavailable for any socializing during the day. CBS owned the Yankees. There was little else of interest on black and white TV. Garry came home from a day of doing agriculture with a tractor and attached it to an implement called a one-way. The equipment was intriguing, and I have had 2 to 3 hours experience pulling a rope to load a hayloft with a Ford tractor. And on Oliver Rowcrop 66 pulling a wagon announced that I knew how to drive the tractor. Garry had just parked at the elevated gas tank. He gave permission to go ahead and move it to the shed. I still recall the anticipation, the thrill of starting up that powerful machine. I got it going and let out the clutch. Before Garry realized that I didn't know what I was doing and that he should shout, "Stop," I had moved forward and driven the one-way into the legs of the gas tank. It rolled onto the ground, still holding whatever fuel was in it. So much for labor-saving machinery. Now it entailed a major chore to restore it to its rightful position. Garry didn't say a word. I appreciated that. He knew that I knew. He and Dad and I weren't successful in getting the tank back up. When Uncle Ben came home, the 4 of us were able to get it back up on the stand. I learned later through other experiences, that anger is a choice. Perhaps Garry already knew that. Rest in peace, David. Les Bridenstine expressed his sadness at the news of Garry's passing. He was always fun and great to be with. In remembering my cousin Garry, I think of all the good times growing up when I came to visit. The highlight was the great egg fight in the barn. Stu, Dave, and Galen Berry came while Garry and I were finding eggs in the barn. The chickens were laying eggs in the bales, so we decided to have an egg fight. Choosing up sides, it was Garry and I versus Stu, Dave, and Galen. It takes a certain skill to throw an egg, so nobody was very accurate. Garry and I had a few more eggs than the Berry brothers. We had cornered them behind some hay bales. Then Galen stood up to see where we were, the egg that was thrown high, hitting right in the forehead. After making sure he was okay and that we had run out of eggs, we decided to call it a draw. Great time with some great cousins. I will always remember Garry with admiration and the fun we had. Stu Berry said he will always have fond memories of Garry. He was an early explorer, runner, boxer, corncob thrower, and someone to look up to. Pauline and I will miss him and are glad we got to spend time with him and Carol last year. Bless Carol and all your family. My memories are these. My lasting memories of Garry are also from those childhood trips from Kansas when aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered. When Stu and I started sharing a bit more information emerged about the great egg fight. Garry, as the oldest, was generally the ringleader. When Aunt Thora told him, "Go entertain your cousins," that was his signal to head up for the pasture, the creek, or the barn, seeking adventures that might involve a double dog dare to jump from the treehouse, swimming in the red pond in the pasture, running from the bull, or choosing up sides for a standoff in the barn. I remember Garry had created a catch of eggs ahead of our visit, some of which were rotten. It was a grand and smelly fight, and the older berries successfully ducked and weaved and remained unstained and unscathed until, as Les said, Galen, the smallest combatant, popped his head up and caught an egg in the forehead. That ended the battle. Joan recalled that Garry tried to hide the evidence by dunking Galen in the stock tank. Galen survived with a few tears and a lump on his forehead, but Aunt Thora lowered the boom and probably the level of danger by mandating that we stay in the yard with games like tag, catch, or dare base. Yes, Garry made those kind of adventures memorable. Cindy Barry Pennington recalls that for whatever reason, I needed family tree information, and Garry went above and beyond to provide it for me. He always teased me, calling me Cindy Cake, but I always knew he was a big softy. He will be missed. And Judy Cundiff Spillers wrote that I always thought Garry was cute, and I had a crush on him. Garry would always take us to the barn. I guess he was showing the city kids about country life. Linda and Levita both chimed in today that they remember those games of dare base vividly, and that Garry was always a fan of the underdog. He looked out for the little kids and made sure that they were able to play just like the rest of us. Sharon Bridenstine-Lambden wrote finally, "My heart is aching as I remember the young boy I grew up with like a brother. We had so much fun together at Grandma and Grandpa's house. We played in the creek, building dams only to watch them wash away and build again. We explored every inch of their land, through the old house and down in the root cellar. We wondered what it would be like to live in that small space and the boys having to sleep underground. We climbed the mulberry trees and ate until we turned purple. We rolled down the hill in the summer grass and slid down it in the snow. We chased each other through the secret passages under the stairs and explored the attic with its hand-crank photograph and old books. We pushed each other on the old tire swing Grandpa hung for us. Sometimes Stanley and Francis joined us. I don't like the fact that they have all left me. I miss them. Garry and I did not stay as close as we grew up and moved ahead with our lives, but he always had a special place in my heart." Those are just a few of the memories we shared. We weren't close in terms of miles. Our parents are scattered to Oregon, Arizona, Ohio, Kansas, and distant parts of Oklahoma. But when we came together, we were family. We played dare base, Annie Over, Mother May I for hours at Aunt Thora's. We ran barefoot, chasing butterflies in Grandma's garden and capturing fireflies under the mulberry trees. We snuck into Granddad's woodshed. We rode Uncle Earl's horses, swung on grapevines, and dammed up the creek to make a swimming hole. We roasted wieners under the forest canopy, listened to the clank and the banter of our parents playing horseshoes, and thumped watermelons in Uncle Earl's field. Our ages spanned a decade and a half, but the older cousins looked out for the younger ones and tried to include everyone. We joked and laughed, and yes, Garry teased us all. Today, we will gather again at Oak Grove Cemetery, not far down the road from the old homestead, and say goodbye to Garry, who helped create so many childhood memories. Then later, we'll meet at Progress School, where our parents, all gone now, spent their formative years. We'll swap stories and memories of Garry and of Vivian and Stanley and Waco and Galen, Leslie, Joyce, Francis, and Sammy, and recall how they livened up those long-ago summers. We'll laugh and cry, catch up on our lives, talk about our families, and then say our goodbyes and scatter once more, somehow comforted by the richness of our shared memories and the kindness, closeness, and kinship that is special to cousins.
My name is Shelby. I'm reading this from my father, Stephen, so it's from his point of view. Yes, Garry Ben was a superhero. My brother, Garry Ben, truly was a superhero. He was incredibly strong. Garry could lift all three of us kids together with one arm and carry us around. He could do a one-arm push-up. He had a broad barrel chest and you could stand on it like a stage if you didn't roll off the barrel. My superhero had endurance. Garry could walk 10 miles every day while fighting off wild and crazy dogs along the way. He had X-ray vision. Garry could look at something working and could understand exactly how it mechanically works. He didn't just see things, he understood them. My superhero was driven and goal-oriented. Garry always set goals in his life and pushed himself to improve. He was purpose-driven to get better at what he tried to accomplish. Even in the hospital near the end, he complained to the physical therapist that she needed to give him a goal to accomplish instead of just walk around his bed. He said, "I need a goal." He was brilliant and inquisitive. His mind consumed all topics of interest, and he would read and research each topic of interest until he knew its subject matter. He was always fact-based. He could see through the fluff and noise and would zero in on the facts. As Garry and Joe Friday once said, "Just the facts, ma'am." My superhero had integrity. Even though he was super competitive, he wouldn't and couldn't cheat. Cheating would have ruined everything he stood for and what he was trying to accomplish as his goal. He had an incredible ear for listening and retaining information. Garry could hear, remember, and then sing any song. He knew all the words and all the verses. His favorite genre was country music. The night before his passing, I asked Garry if he would like any particular songs shared at his celebration of life. Instead of answering, he broke out in song. The first two songs he sang were sad. As you know, most country songs are sad. And I said, "Any other songs that aren't this sad?" He spent the next 2 hours singing to me, Skylar, and Jordan. He sang and noted his favorite artist was Ray Price. He sang all of his songs, all of the verses, and knew all of the words. My superhero was brave. Garry was brave in a way that was hard to explain. He could run across a wheat field with his arms stretched out wide and his eyes closed tight and trusting in his way. He never thought of peeking until he hit the barbed wire fence. He still carries those scars today. What courage! Vivian and I both peeked after about 30 feet. My superhero danced with his wife, Carol, his siblings, his nieces and nephews, and his great-nieces and nephews. It was a life of waltzes and two-step with a fiddle and steel guitar playing in the background. It was his dance, and he danced it well. My superhero was always calm and cool under pressure. When he got the news of his terminal condition, Skylar, Jordan, and I went to St. Louis to assist him. The first thing he said to me when I entered his hospital room was, "Where are you going to bury me?" I told him, Oak Grove Cemetery with the rest of us. He asked, "Has it been arranged?" I said, "Yes, Cody's on top of this situation," and then he relaxed. Then Garry said, "I didn't get the IRS to accept my income tax return filing, and I have it complete, but the IRS website won't accept it. Can you take care of that for me too?" Garry had always completed his own tax return his whole life. Einstein once said, "The hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax." Garry wanted to know how it worked, why things were deductible, and how the tax system works. I told him that I could finish his tax return filing as I did have some expertise in that area. I was thankful he didn't ask me to replace the garbage disposal, as it was also on the blink. Garry knew as a history buff and agreed with Benjamin Franklin when he wrote in his world, in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. My superhero had conquered taxes, and now he has conquered death with poise, conviction, a positive mindset, peace, and bravery like no ordinary person. His last parting words to his wife and family around his bedside were, "I have no regrets. I have had a wonderful life." Yes, my brother Garry Ben was a superhero.
These words were written by Garry's sister, Joan. I often think of our childhood and how much Garry's world turned upside down with the arrival of Vivian, Stephen, and me. He had been an only child up to that point, and he was 13 when I finally showed up. Because he was so much older than us, one might think we would have viewed him as a parental figure. We were certainly left in his care often, as my parents went about the task of making a living and managing a household. However, he was not a parental figure, not even close. No parent would have built a raft and put 3 young children in the middle of a pond when they did not know how to swim, and then tell them this particular pond was bottomless. No parent would boost the 3 of us on top of the roof to play cowboys and Indians. He would shoot at us with a stick from the safety of the ground and then encourage us to fall to the ground when we got hit. It needed to be realistic, so we would jump from the roof to the grass. No parent would build a tree house and encourage us to jump from the platform. No bones were broken in the making of our childhood, though I am still not sure why. I do know our days were filled with fun and adventure because of him. My mother used to tell stories about Garry when he was a little boy. One winter day, Dad took him to the barn to do chores. Dad was anxious to get back to the house, and when they were done, and Garry was dawdling. So Dad reached down and got his hand, picked him up, and set him down, and then repeated this until they reached the warmth of the house, after which Garry looked up at him and said, "Well, Ben, I didn't know you were in such a much of a hurry." Garry made his musical debut when he was 6 and sang "All I Want for Christmas Is My 2 Front Teeth" while Mom accompanied him on the piano. He still had his teeth, so she attached a piece of black gum to the front too. Mid-song, the gum came loose. He never missed a beat, as he knew the show must go on. He just chewed the gum while finishing his song. Garry was a hands-on brother and made sure we knew how to play all the sports. If the baseball would hit the mitt and fall out, he would tell us, "If you can touch it, you can catch it." So we would stretch that much harder the next time. Since he had not had anyone to play with for so long, it seemed he needed to make up for lost time. I think the greatest gift he ever received was Vivian. He called her Jo and was the only one that continued that nickname all her life. In a picture we have of her when she was 18 months old, he had stuffed socks into the shoulders of her shirt for shoulder pads, rolled up her pants, and had her get into a hiking position. He built a giant ping pong table out of plywood and bolted it to the dining room table. We had to suck in to walk around it, but for some reason, I don't remember my mother complaining. I look back now and think Garry must have had a lot of patience because he had 3 young athletes to train, and he took it very seriously. Garry was goal-oriented, and that is putting it mildly. One example was when he decided we would wake up early and lift weights. He wanted Stephen to put on some muscle, and I wasn't going to be left out. I am guessing our ages were about 10 and 11. He needed to be able to track our progress, so he made a spreadsheet and documented our increases. It was also during this time he convinced me I needed to eat a raw egg to achieve maximum performance. I did it, but he went first. He was very persuasive, and we took his knowledge as gospel. I don't think we ever questioned his wisdom. If Garry said it, it must be right. In all our games and interactions, there was one thing we never did. We were never allowed to cheat. This became very clear when we were in the pasture south of the house, and Garry bet that he could shut his eyes and run from the pasture through the gate by the barn before we could. We all shut our eyes and began to jog north. I lasted about 2 steps before my eyes flew open. Vivian remembers running a few steps and then watching him. She was thinking, surely he is peeking or will open his eyes soon. But he continued running and got out of line with the gate. Vivian kept thinking, he's just goofing off. He'll look and get back on track. But he didn't. He plowed into the barbed wire fence at a pretty good clip. He wasn't mortally wounded like he could have been, but he did get cut from the barbs. We went to the house to tend to his wounds. My mother shook her head. I think she shook her head a lot before she got Garry raised, but he didn't cheat. After Garry moved to St. Louis, we all missed him terribly. Phone calls were few and far between because long-distance calls were expensive. When we got to talk, we would all gather around the phone and take our turn. My mother also insisted we write to him often. I remember that in one letter I drew pictures of us roller skating. I made us all with stick figures and labeled us to make sure he knew who was who. My mother was sure he was lonely in the big city without all of us and did everything she could to lessen his homesickness. However, he jumped into all the sports available in St. Louis and, unbeknownst to us, had met a girl named Carol. She pretty much erased all loneliness that we might have imagined, and they became inseparable for the rest of life. They created a life many only dream about. She was the second of 5 sisters, Sherry, Carol, Cheryl, Charlene, and Cindy. I think they made Garry an honorary sister because he became entrenched in Carol's family and was a wonderful uncle to the sisters' children and later their children's children. He cared about them greatly, and that helped make St. Louis truly a place he called home. Music was a big part of Garry and Carol's lives, and they attended many concerts by a wide variety of musicians. It was not unusual to hear Garry break out in song, and as you've already heard, he knew all the words to all the verses of them all. Often they would attend the community concerts performed at local parks. Garry and Carol would come back to Oklahoma often. Even after our parents died, he made it a point to spend time with us. Vivian, Stevens, and my kids picked up where we left off in their adoration of their uncle, and he gave them the same thing he gave us. He gave us what we craved. He gave us his attention, and he gave us his time. He asked questions. He learned who each of us were and what we thought. He did it with us, with our kids, and with our grandkids. It is difficult to put into words what a strong, vibrant, exciting brother Garry was. He had an analytical mind and would dissect whatever he was studying, whether it was a person, place, or thing, and he understood it completely. Things would almost become an obsession until he was satisfied he had exhausted learning about every detail and aspect. I was staying in his guest room a few weeks ago and noticed on his bookshelves many of his college books, engineering, calculus, etc. These books were 60 years old. I asked myself, who keeps their college books? Then I answered myself, Garry does. And it would not surprise me if he would perhaps open them on occasion. He was always learning, always challenging himself, always pushing, but in the best possible way. We talked about all the trips he and Carol made together. He loved seeing new places. However, I have come to believe his most treasured times were in the quiet moments sitting on the deck overlooking the lake. He and Carol would watch an egret perch on their dock and pluck a fish from the water. Garry would tell a joke and Carol would laugh. Even after 55 years of marriage, she still thought he was cute. Garry was easygoing, and my mother used to say she had never seen him in a bad mood. He always had a smile on his face, and he was content no matter where he was or what he was doing. He lived his life with intention and with purpose. We were fortunate to get to be a part of such a caring, fun-loving man. As for me, all I can say is he was an awesome brother.
As we sat on the front porch of that old gray house where I was born and raised, and stared out at the dusty fields where Daddy always worked hard every day. I think it kinda hurt him when I said, Daddy, there's a lot that I don't know. Don't you ever dream about a life where corn don't grow. He just sat there silent, staring at his favorite coffee cup. I saw a storm of mixed emotion in his eyes when he looked up. He said, son, I know at your age, it feels like this whole world is turning slow. And you think you'll find the answer to it all where corn don't grow. As we sat on the front porch of that old gray house where I was born and raised, and stared out at the dusty fields where Daddy always worked hard every day. I think it kinda hurt him when I said, Daddy, there's a lot that I don't know. Don't you ever dream about a life where corn don't grow. He just sat there silent, staring at his favorite coffee cup. I saw a storm of mixed emotion in his eyes when he looked up. He said, son, I know at your age, it feels like this whole world is turning slow. And you think you'll find the answer to it all where corn don't grow.
just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
There's a lot of paper up here. The family wants me to be sure that you know that you are invited to Oak Grove Cemetery for the graveside service. If you choose to be a part of that, you're welcome. And also then to the Progress Schoolhouse for a lunch. If you would prefer to just go straight to the schoolhouse, you are welcome to do that and then wait for the family to arrive for the luncheon. Go out now in peace from this place, giving thanks for Garry's life and for life itself and all of its fullness. And may the peace of God go with you. Amen.